Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me, as always, is my producer, Kevin Black. Stephen Gillespie is not joining me tonight. However, we got to keep it rolling with the NBA Lottery Team Series. This is our build-up towards the 2022 NBA Draft. We're doing a whole bunch of different types of shows on this podcast. We're doing big board talk. We're doing mock drafts. We're previewing the lottery. We're going to be doing a reaction to that this week as well. But part of what we've been doing lately is really trying to dive into some of the lottery teams, react to what their season was last year, talk about some of the young talent that's on the roster currently and where they could possibly look to target in the 2022 NBA Draft. We've already covered the Detroit Pistons. We've covered the Houston Rockets. Now we got to move on to the Orlando Magic, and I have no one better with me to do that with, and somebody who I got to work with him one other time on content due to a mutual friend of ours, Chris LeBron. We did a mock draft together, was incredibly impressed with the knowledge that this guy had that I was able to take away from. You know him as the host of the Max Van Auken podcast, co-host of the Believe in Orlando Magic podcast, Max Van Auken. Max, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing fantastic. I appreciate the kind words. I was impressed with yourself. That draft show was incredible. Like the knowledge, and if like you're a real hoop junkie and just evaluating talent, and I think we're all nerds when it comes to NBA and hoops, and it was just amazing. And so if you're a nerd of basketball and you just love the game, that was one of the best episodes I've been a part of.
Oh, if there's one thing that Chris LeBron knows how to do well. I mean, shout out to Chris over at the Off the Ball Network. He does a lot well. But if there's one thing he really knows how to do well, it's get a whole bunch of people together who have never interacted with one another and get them to do one of the most cohesive mock draft shows I think I've ever been a part of. That's a talent, man. I don't know if I could pull that off, but shout out to Chris.
Yeah, he's like a GM of podcasting in a sense. He knows how to assemble the right pieces together and deliver some great product. But no, I really do appreciate it. The Orlando Magic certainly been a fun team to be a part of and watch, believe it or not.
So as I mentioned at the top, he is a co-host of the Believe in Orlando Magic podcast. He's credentialed media to go and cover Orlando Magic games. So Max does a great job with his own podcast front. He covers a wide variety of sports topics. You do so much, man. I'm impressed with all of the work, everything that you do on your own podcast front, your own media front. But naturally, you do know a thing or two about the Orlando Magic. So I had to have you on. And we got to start just kind of what I've been asking everybody who's come on for this series, just big picture takeaways this previous season. What did you see from the Orlando Magic? What are some of the bigger takeaways before we start diving into specific players?
Right. I appreciate that, though, first and foremost, seriously. When it comes to the Orlando Magic, so we can be brutally honest, right? It's okay to have these conversations. They're not a good basketball team. And like,
sure.
Oh, hey, that you cover the Magic. Like, well, I can't really lie to you. They're clearly on the bottom of the league. Like, I can't fake those type of stats and numbers. They're not a good basketball. But I am a glass half full type of person. There's usually a handful of teams. You have really good legitimate championship contenders. You have really good teams, but we don't really buy them as championship contenders. And then you have like the middle of the pack type of teams. And then you have the bottom end of the teams. And obviously the Orlando Magic fall on the bottom end of the teams. But one thing that I really like about that is you clearly get a good spot in the lottery. And you have an opportunity to have a young nucleus, which they have. They're one of the youngest teams in the NBA. So my takeaway from this past season was really trying to find an identity and creating a culture. And so one thing that we have going for us is that we do have a very young nucleus. And that's one thing I feel like a lot of people are fascinated by when you grow something organically versus getting a bunch of rentals. And so this is no shade to those teams that have gotten a bunch of rentals, but if the Brooklyn Nets, I'll just use an example. So you have Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant. At the time, it was James Harden. It's pretty cool, right? An accumulation of talent, but there's just something about seeing something grow organically. And the Golden State Warriors are really the epitome of this. The Spurs of just seeing the players from scratch develop into something, and it just builds this type of feeling that fans can get behind. People gravitate towards that. You saw the struggle. You saw them develop. It's just not a quick it's not the Expendables where you put a bunch of superstars together and make a great film. Like, believe it or not, I know I'm going a little bit on a rant here, but those Marvel movies, people think it's just an accumulation of heroes, but they each had individual movies that went into the Avengers. So
Oh,
you grew
absolutely.
those characters. So I say that to say that the Orlando Magic are drafting these individual pieces and they're growing into something that we hope to be. I mean, the Avengers would be, of course, the ideal situation, but it's cool to see these young players develop. So my biggest takeaway from last season was really seeing who are the guys that you want to rock with, who are the guys that you could say that's going to be our direction, who we need to start figuring out where the pieces fit going forward.
I really do love. Well, first of all, I'm also a big Marvel guy, so we can throw any of those analogies out there. I'm gonna love all of them, but really, I love how that hits home specifically because you have a lot of these. The majority of the roster is a lot of young talent, right? But
Yeah.
they're kind of all from different walks, right? Like similar to when the Avengers come together to be the collection that they are. They're all sort of from different walks, right? You got guys like Jonathan Isaac and Markel Fultz, who are still young in their own right, but they've had some injury troubles, which have really, not made their careers as consistent as to what they could be so far. You have Mo Bamba, who has a lot of talent as a big man, but he hasn't necessarily gotten the quote unquote opportunity really to prove more of that until what we got to see later in last season. I'm sure we'll talk about Mo Bamba a little later in this podcast. You have Wendell Carter, who was traded to the team from Chicago. This is his second team already. So you have like this certain group of people who want to talk about how he's quote unquote been written off on, but I had a number 4 in that draft class. I still believe in a lot of the upside that he has. Wow. And then you have this log jam of guards, which is really, I guess, appropriately where we can start. I mean, you have Cole Anthony. I already mentioned Fultz at the top. Jalen Suggs was just drafted last year. And you have RJ Hampton, who was also on a second team, was acquired in a trade from Denver. You have these 4 guards who are all in theory trying to compete with one another, to establish themselves not only as rotation players on a team, right? But we're talking about starters, right? Who are going to be the starting guards moving forward? So out of those 4 names, we can kind of pick each one apart a little bit, but out of those 4 guys, Max, who's the one that really intrigues you the most after watching them last year?
I've always been high on Markel Fultz, higher than others. But to answer your question, I'll start off with, I believe Jalen Suggs and Markel Fultz are those guys that I truly believe are like, okay, if we see to continue to develop, those could be guys. Now, Jalen Suggs, to me, has the most raw, untapped potential right now. So he probably has the highest ceiling out of the bunch. Markel Fultz has had some more time in this league, so it's not that he can't still develop, but Jalen Suggs literally is a baby in the league. So he has the most untapped potential out of the bunch. And so I believe Jalen Suggs is definitely a cornerstone for the Orlando Magic. You just have to see him continue to develop. And Markel Fultz, because Markel went from obviously being a number 1 to then all of a sudden everyone's selling their Markel Fultz stock. He doesn't know how to shoot. He's using virtual reality goggles. So like, how do you not even know how to shoot? And so everyone just said he complete bust. And so when the Orlando Magic acquired him originally, I thought that was a genius move because it's a low risk, high reward. Somebody that everyone's off, but yet if he can tap into that potential that we did see, this could be a steal. And we see flashes of that. The way, even without a refined jump shot, he's still able to create space, keep the defense on their toes. He can get to the paint at will. He has really good size. He's a big guard, very athletic. And one thing that I love about him is his energy. He's a good culture guy. And also he has developed that jump shot, right? It's not like he's refusing to shoot the 3 like I see progress. So those would be my 2 guys. Now, when it goes to Cole Anthony and RJ Hampton, I was higher on RJ Hampton than most. And I just believed he needed the right situation. Denver wasn't the right situation for him. So I believe he has an opportunity with Orlando, but it's still kind of a hard spot for him just because of how many guards there are. But he, again, is someone that you want in the open floor. He's a big guard. He's athletic. So the 2 guys, like I said, would definitely be Markel Fultz, Jalen Suggs. Cole Anthony, now this may spark a little bit of not controversy, but I see him more as a 6-man. I don't see him as a guy who I would want to build going forward with. But if I can continue to have him on this rookie deal, obviously, coming off the bench possibly and being that spark, I could see that more of a role for him going forward. I think Jalen Suggs has more of that starter cornerstone potential.
We're going to double back on all these guys, but you mentioned Cole Anthony. Man, Cole was my guy in that draft class. He still is my guy. I guess My question to you about Cole is, would that answer be different had he not had the little bit of injury trouble that he did in the second half of the year and tailed off from what he was doing in end of October, November through December? Because he was having like a borderline all-star year as a second-year guard. And like Orlando Magic fans were clamoring for him to get all-star votes, but like for good reason. Like you could actually build a legitimate case for him to have been like an all-star reserve with the way he was trending.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. That is. And Jalen Suggs got injured as well. And so, I mean, one thing, Cole Anthony has a game where you're like, wow, like, okay, that's why I get what you're saying. But then there'll be a game where I'm like, what is he doing? Like, there hasn't been a real in-between. And so, obviously, when you're younger, you're getting your feet wet in the league. I'm sure that consistency will come. And I may be completely wrong. But from what my eyes are telling me, he's a great young piece to have. But I'm still not 100% convinced. Now, I love his charisma, his energy. Like, oh, you could tell these guys.
He's a leader. He is a leader for that team. And that's something that I don't know if they have that necessarily elsewhere on the team. I think he needs to kind of be in the locker room for that reason. But we've said, to your point, if you want to project him more as like a six-man, like we've seen those like top-tier bench guys also be like the quote-unquote like vocal leaders of a team. So it's not like he needs to be a starter just because he's that guy in the locker room.
Yeah, he's talented enough to be a starter. Like, I'm not questioning that. But considering that what's going on with the Magic, like you said, we have a logjam of guards. It's like, it's not like he's in a situation where they desperately need some scoring in the starting lineup. Like, we have so many guards. And so we're just trying to figure out where the pieces fit. Now, going forward, depending on how the draft goes, I know we'll get into that and what we can get. In some lineups, it makes more sense for him to be the starter. So I think it's just continuing to see how these players develop. But me personally, I would like to see him off that six-man role if we continue to go in the right direction going forward. But like I said, I could be completely wrong because there's nights where, like you said, you could make a legitimate case for him to be an all-star at one point in time.
So Fultz is an easy answer to be in the starting lineup. I think Jalen Suggs, and I was really high on Jalen Suggs coming out of the draft too. Like I would have had him probably as the fourth best prospect in the draft. Now, looking back, I don't like to completely like tear down my draft thoughts after only like 1 year. Yeah. Like I think a lot of people would put Scotty Barnes up in that conversation. And there's another segment of Magic fans who would probably be like, no, Franz Wagner's actually like our main piece between the two going forward. Like those are all legitimate arguments. We will definitely talk about Franz a little later on. But Fultz is an easy answer because of the defense, right? Like that guy plays legitimate point of attack defense at the point guard position. We can have some questions about the shooting, but really when it comes to who's the best point guard on the roster and who is one of the two best backcourt pieces defensively, I don't think there's any question that the answer to those questions are the combination of Fultz and Suggs, which is why I think it's very reasonable for you to say those are probably the two pieces moving forward. And Fultz is the one who has the long-term deal. Like he's a little bit older, had to come from another team, but the contract's very reasonable, right? Like 16.5 mil the next 2 years and then 17 million going into 23-24. Like given, as you said, the type of value he brings when he's on and he's healthy, that's a perfectly reasonable contract for a point guard in today's NBA. So I don't hate the move at all. I'm still a Fultz believer myself. And really, at the end of the year, he did start to put a lot of things together to the point where, like, Cole Anthony was trying to find his way coming back from injury. Fultz was able to be back in the lineup, but Fultz was the best guard on the team at the end of the year when he actually was able to get the time and prove himself in the lineup. Like that's not even up for debate. My only question or qualm with the Fultz-Suggs pairing long-term is, do you buy the shooting between the two of them enough to be your starting backcourt? Because at times they could both be questionable outside shooters. So if you don't have the requisite pieces around those two, you start to get a little murky. Now, maybe in the draft, there's a few names we can throw out when we get to that point in the podcast that can definitely help the shooting aspect of the team. But does that pairing in terms of shooting give you any cause to pause?
Oh, I mean, yeah, of course. It definitely. I would be lying to you if I said it didn't give me some pause because they've had some rough shooting nights. Cole Anthony is certainly the best shooter out of the bunch. Like his range, he has so much confidence too. And that's one thing I really like about Cole Anthony. He can miss his first 4 shots and he'll take that 5th shot with no hesitation. So I like that about Cole. But I definitely, depending on what pieces we can get or what we may draft, there's definitely lineups where it's going to call for Cole Anthony to be in that starting lineup just because, like you said, of shooting purposes. Jalen Suggs is still a very raw talent, not the most refined jump shot. I mean, now who really is going in their first 2 years, 3 years in the NBA? But yeah, there's definitely some shooting concerns with the Orlando Magic, even just as a whole, not even just as a backcourt.
So I mentioned the leadership aspect with Cole Anthony, but Jalen Suggs also showed plenty of that in 1 year at Gonzaga. And I think he can grow into being more of that guy in the NBA once more of his game starts to come around, right? Like he can really back up how vocal he is, how good quality character of a guy he is once more of the offensive production really is there for him. We know what he brings defensively on a night-to-night basis. That dude is a dog. He's a competitor. He can legitimately guard multiple positions in the NBA. Definitely your 1s and 2s, some 3s, depending on the lineup if another team elects to go the small ball route. I still fully buy in on Jalen Suggs as being a potential star in the NBA. It's only been 1 year, but after watching him in an Orlando Magic uniform through some injury stuff, through some ups and downs, would you tell Orlando Magic fans to hold on to all of that stock that they might have had before the draft, that he could be a potential star? Or do you think there's reason to maybe come down on him just a little bit? Like maybe he is more of a guy who's just going to fit in with everybody else around him versus be more of like that first or second option that people might have thought before the draft?
That's a great question. I would hold my stock because I have a tendency of doing this too. And that's just being a prisoner of the moment or like that microwave society because there's so many. But look at this guy or this guy. It's like, why isn't he this? And it's like, wait a second. This is just like his first year. Like, or this is just his second year. Like you got to give some people time to breathe before you can start making certain decisions because that whole development process, some people it takes 2 years and they pop. Some people it's 3 years and they pop. I mean, Kobe Bryant didn't even pop right away. I'm not saying Jalen Suggs is Kobe Bryant by any means, but everyone has a different rate in which they pop. Now, if it got to year 4, year 5, and you're seeing no types of improvement, okay, yeah, you may be right. Lower our expectations, but just given the sample size that we have, and like you mentioned, just the person that he is. If you know you have a really high character guy who's built like a football player with tons of athleticism and great leadership qualities, I'm not going to sell my stock just yet. I'm going to give him a couple more years to develop.
So let's move into some of the forwards / bigs. We talked about the backcourt a little bit. All right. I'm not as present on Magic Twitter as I am with some other fan bases. So I honestly don't know the answer to this question, but where is everybody seem to be at on the Jonathan Isaac situation? Because that's just from the outside looking in an incredibly frustrating situation. Like if this guy's on the court, he's like an all defense type of performer, regardless of what he gives you on the offensive end. But the dude can literally never stay healthy and on the court. So like, are the fans actually fed up at this point, or is everybody still kind of trying to have that optimistic outlook? Like, just give him whatever time he needs. Eventually, at some point, he's going to come back. He's going to be the player that we expect him to be.
So from what I experience, it's a little half and half. Now, I'm the type of guy too that like I utilize Twitter. I don't let it utilize me. So like what I call it's called like post and ghost in a sense. So like I get or else I get involved in this like toxic back and forth with some people. I'm like, why am I even doing this? So, and especially with the fans as well, I try not to engage in basketball conversation with everybody. So from the people I've like legitimately talked to about this, especially like just their pregame and just halftime and stuff, we all see the potential that he has. Like you said, a guy who's 6'10", he's 24 years old and can guard 1 through 5, 1 through 4. He was knocking down the 3. He's just a universal type of player that you want in 2022. Like that's exactly who you'd want on your team. But of course there's frustration because the guy just can't stay healthy. And typically the bigger you are, injuries usually don't get better over time. He is a tall, lanky guy, not tons of muscle. So sometimes you wonder, kind of frail, can he take that type of beating? And especially finishing a lot in the paint, which he did. But My personal opinion is I would be a little bit patient. I know that's not the fun answer per se because it is frustrating and you're paying the guy $17 million a year. He's constantly getting hurt, but I want to see him with this young lineup that we have. And if he can stay healthy, I still think there's tons of potential with that type of lineup because that's a scary, young, fast, long, athletic team with him and Mo Bamba on the same court. I mean, they're literally covering half court with their fans. Like, it could be ridiculous. And then with RJ Speed and Markel's a big guard and Cole Anthony's athleticism, like, it can get really Wendell Carter Jr. Like, we're a really scary team when it comes to athleticism and length and defense. We just need to all be there. So because I know the potential, I would still give it some time before I get too I don't know what the word would be, but I guess just impatient with him because it is frustrating. Like there's availability. At some point in time, you got to be available. But I would say he still has a little bit of room to work with.
So speaking of that kind of that forward spot, that mix and match spot to where you can start to put pieces together with some of the bigs that you have that you mentioned, with the guards that we talked about. Well, we'll get to the bigs in a second, but Franz Wagner, man, holy cow. This guy completely exceeded all of my expectations last year. He was touted. There were some things that if you watch the tape close enough with him in Michigan, you could tell that eventually he was going to grow into doing a little more offensively. But really his calling card was being this guy who was nasty on the defensive end, a multi-positional defender. He brought that to the Orlando Magic and helped the Magic actually have the 19th rated defense in the league, which when we talk about bottom feeders, really you guys were bottom feeders, quote unquote, because of just not being able to score the basketball efficiently in virtually every play type you want to call out, right? But it wasn't the defense. You guys were actually like trending towards being a good defensive team.
We were.
In the NBA. He's a part of it, but when the offense was clicking, a lot of the times it was because Franz was able to get it going and show a lot more on the offensive end far sooner than I expected. Now, I usually don't like to whip out a lot of the synergy percentiles with rookies or in some cases even second-year players because they're never going to look good. Most of the time, they're like never going to look good. But Franz rated out in the 59th percentile in terms of total offense, which does rate out as good on synergy. That's an awesome stepping stone for any rookie player in the NBA. When you break down all of his different offensive play types, the dude doesn't rate out anywhere below the 38th percentile in terms of the play types that he was involved most commonly in. So for the most part, he's rating out good to very good to excellent everywhere offensively. We know what he's capable of on the defensive end. That's the type of home run pick that I think every NBA team would want to be able to hit with a second lottery pick. Like I said at the top, there's absolutely an argument to be made. I'm sure a lot of Orlando Magic fans have already made it. Like he's the crown jewel of the draft class last year, not even necessarily Jalen Suggs. I agree with you. I want to be patient with Jalen. I think there might be two crown jewels there. But really what Franz did, he had an incredibly slept on rookie season, I think, up until he had that 30-plus point explosion. I believe it was against the Milwaukee Bucks, if I'm correct. It was like 38 points or something like that along those lines of the Milwaukee Bucks, where he just literally couldn't miss from mid-range and from the corners, and everything he was doing offensively was working during that game. But the passing flashes you see, the shooting from all over the floor, the fact that a 6'9", 220-pound forward, his weakness to his game was finishing around the basket by the numbers last year, which you would expect him to, at that size, continue to improve around the basket as he gets older. Like, Max, I'm gonna throw this one at you. I don't know if this is crazy or what.
Okay.
When we were evaluating Franz last year for the draft, I said that like a really high-end outcome for him could be Gordon Hayward in the NBA, and I thought that was incredibly optimistic outcome. I said it. I didn't know if Franz could actually get there.
Right.
You watch him after his rookie year, though. It's crazy to say because Gordon Hayward at his best was like a top 5 small forward in the NBA. But like you watch everything that Franz did last year and how much better he could continue to get with how young he still is. I don't think that's like a terribly bold proclamation anymore, at least not as bold as what I once thought it was. What really impressed you watching Franz last year, Max? And what do you think his upside is for this Orlando Magic team?
First of all, I don't think that was crazy at all. I think that was actually a pretty fantastic. That was pretty genius to say that, especially before the draft, because expectations are everything with the draft. If you go in with super high expectations for a guy and he's just a good NBA player, you're disappointed because your expectations were so high. If I didn't have high expectations, I'm going to be honest, I did not whatsoever with him. And I thought, okay, well, like, let's see what he could do. You know, I've learned through covering the draft for the time that I have now, you don't want to you want to go in with an unbiased view, and just however the player that you're not familiar with performs is how he performs, evaluate it through that. So I didn't have any high expectations for him.
As a caveat, I didn't have terribly high expectations for him either. Like I had a top 10 grade on him as a draft prospect. When if I really wanted to go back and sit down last year, not just do the tier stuff, but like sign numbers next to a guy, I would have given him a top 10 grade. But that was more so because I thought that those guys at a certain size with that much skill and that feel for the game, even if he doesn't do anything that screams like star or potentially superstar, he's going to be a player who fits into a number of lineups. He can just be a really solid role player for a long time in the NBA. But like, yeah, I didn't actually think he could start meeting some of those like star level expectations so soon either. So
yeah, it's insane. And I sincerely owe Franz an apology. I really do, because he was the story of this season. I know we were talking about the backcourt, but he took everybody by surprise. I mean, averaging 15 points his rookie year, and he's an underrated passer. I really like his vision. You mentioned it. He's a dog defensively. Like he was never scared of any defensive matchup. I've seen him on an island alone when Kyrie dropped 60-something points here in Amway, and he did not care. Like, he would take that matchup. And so there's just things that you don't show on a stat sheet, but you just watch it like in person, or you watch it on TV and you pay attention to it.
Yeah.
He wasn't scared of those matchups. Like, and he has a very good, and this is the culture of Michigan, very good demeanor. Like, he didn't really seem to put his head down. You know what you're getting with him night in and night out. Some nights, obviously, you have better shooting nights than others, but he was the steal for us. And going forward, having him in the lineup, I mean, he shot 35% from three and 46% from the field his rookie year. 4 rebounds, 3 assists. And I'm not the biggest stat guy, but as a rookie that you didn't have the highest expectations for, to come and perform that way, he's definitely a cornerstone of the Orlando Magic, right? We're talking about who's the cornerstone for the backcourt. He was a steal. And I don't know if you call an 8th pick a steal, but because of what my expectations were, he really surpassed that. Like, I sincerely owe Franz an apology.
You can use the word steal, because the fact that I can put him in a conversation in a year where we had Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, Scotty Barnes, Jalen Green was really picking it up for the Rockets in the second half of the year, basically post All-Star break. Josh Giddey showed some real legitimate flashes for the Thunder. Like, when you can put Franz in that conversation, and the fact that you got that player at number 8, talk about a potential home run draft for the Orlando Magic. Just those 2 picks, especially if Suggs really lives up to being more the player we think he is.
Look at that draft. Like, thinking about everything, like when we evaluated it in that amazing show we had.
Spoiler alert, the next draft ain't going to be like this one, though. Just a spoiler warning, but
it really was like every player that we wanted them. What can we like? We hope Scotty Barnes can be this. Like, we hope Cade can be that guy, and Jalen Green is that prolific. And literally every guy that you would want to really live up to it seems to have lived up to it. And it's still so early. Like, these rookies have been so effective so early.
Yeah.
I don't know what you credit that to. I don't know if it's one particular thing. I don't know if it's something they're eating, but they're just so effective so early.
So I think part of that, and I've talked about this on other episodes of the podcast, Max, is that I think a lot of these guys went to the right situations for them, right? Like, I thought his best fit out of those top teams would be Detroit. I thought that Mobley's best fit out of those top teams would be Cleveland. I thought that Jalen Green's best fit out of those teams would be Houston. We know what types of players Toronto's looking for. They're looking to build an identity. Scotty Barnes fits that identity. Do you think that Franz landed in the best situation for him, maybe coming to a franchise that doesn't have unrealistic expectations, a place where he's coming in with more freedom to be able to create and experiment, not just defensively, but also on the offensive end of the floor, where he's not getting picked apart every single night because he tries to be over creative or over inventive doing this on offense. He can kind of just do it. And if it works for him, great. Like, these are things we can build on heading into the next game. If it doesn't work, he's playing in Orlando. Not everybody has their eyes on Orlando every night. Like, you can kind of just go back to the drawing board a little bit. You think that helps him a little bit?
100% fit matters. Situation matters. That's a great point. I mean, I don't know if you're a big NFL guy, but you can only overcome so. Like, I love Trevor Lawrence. He's in Jacksonville. Like, Andrew,
that poor Trevor Lawrence situation, man.
Andrew is amazing, but he never had an O-line. Like, there's only so much you can overcome. So your situation truly matters if you're going to really shine. And you're right. I mean, I'm looking at our roster right now, and like, besides at the forward position, who we've already talked about, who was injured anyway, Jonathan.
Yeah, let's outline the keepers. Like, go into it. Like, who do you see as the keepers?
I'm looking like, now this is no disrespect to any player, right? So
sure.
I'm not tearing anyone down, but
we got to have these honest conversations, because it matters when we look at, where you guys are going to go with the top 3 pick.
Who in this lineup would you say is a legitimate, like, good small forward to have? We have Ignis, we have Schofield, and that was it for small forwards. So this was the perfect situation for Franz to go to. He has nobody at that small forward position that can hurt or hinder his development. Like, that's exactly what we needed at the small forward position. Jonathan Isaac, power forward, he could obviously play positionless basketball, but he's not healthy. So our backcourt was jammed. We got rid of Vooch. We want Mo Bamba to develop. We got Lopez, but we were really lacking at that small forward position. So
I guess like Chuma Okeke is really the only other name you can throw in there. But, like, again, that comes back to, is he actually available to play basketball? Like, he's had some struggles himself coming into the league and then being healthy for the Magic.
Yeah, and a lot of the times he's like, they play him power forward, or especially, like, that's a good point. But yeah, like, if I was Franz, this would be the team I would want to go to. And so
he's your small forward in the future. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about
it. 100%. Like, how many locks can we really say with this Orlando Magic, right? We're debating about the young core. I personally like Mo Bamba, but fans get impatient. Like, Vooch left. They expect more from Mo. Is Mo a lock for the future? Like, I can't even say, and I think Wendell Carter Jr. was the best player this season. Is he really a lock for us? Because his trade value just went up. So is he really going to stay here? And so I really think that Franz is the guaranteed 100% lock for this roster.
I have a question that I want to go to, but I kind of want to finish out with talking about some of these guys individually. So we're going to finish out with the 2 bigs, and then we'll move into the question that just popped in my head for you, Max. But Wendell Carter and Mo Bamba, interesting situation, because Carter he has a long-term contract, right? Like, you guys don't have to potentially look at trading him. He's on the roster, extended him. He has it. Mo Bamba, on the other hand, he's not locked in long-term. So nope. Have you seen enough for Mo Bamba to want to extend him? Or do you think this is one of the, because it's really interesting. Obviously, like, you can go one of, like, 3 ways, right? Like, you guys can extend them, you can show your commitment to them, and you can keep them there for the foreseeable future. You can let him sign an offer sheet elsewhere and, like, let him walk as a restricted free agent, or you can match something and still keep him, or maybe I don't know the mechanics of, like, doing, like, a sign and trade in, like, a situation like that. Like, there's a lot of complicated options on the table, but I think it all stems from the same question. Like, do you think the Orlando Magic have seen enough from Mo Bamba to where they want him there long term?
I don't think they have. I think
wouldn't say they have either.
Yeah, I think they like Mo Bamba. I don't think they love Mo Bamba, and so I won't be surprised if they move off him. And me personally, I really like Mo Bamba. Me and Shad were pretty high on him for a while, and we've always talked about it watching his games, but I don't think this is the right situation for him, actually. I think he needs to play with a more developed point guard, a system where he could thrive more in, because he does – what do you want from, like, a 2022 big? Is a big who can move his feet, who's not a liability late in games, who could block shots, protect the rim, and stretch the floor. And he could do all of those things, but it just hasn't been – the puzzle piece doesn't fit. Like, sometimes it looks like it can. It's like one of those puzzle pieces you have where it looks like it should fit and you just keep trying to make it work, but it's just not fitting. But you really like the puzzle piece. I think that's going to become Mo Bamba for the Orlando Magic, where they like him a lot, but I don't think they love him. And so if the right situation comes about, I won't be surprised if he's no longer a Magic.
Do they love Wendell Carter? Do they definitely love him?
I think so, but the people that I think they love are the Jalen Suggs, are the Franz Wagners. Those are the people. Cole Anthony, they love them. Like that's who they love. Who I think they really like Wendell Carter Jr. But like I said, he had the best season for the Orlando Magic. That was the best season of his career, right? So I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying they just go ahead and trade him, but when you have a guy who's coming off his best season, of course, you explore what the market would maybe like if, depending on his contract situation. I don't know if they really, really love him because there may be greater opportunity trading him. Now, I don't know that for certain, but he shocked a lot of people this year. I remember watching him. I love watching him play. He's physical. He could stretch the floor. Yeah, he goes up strong. Like, I love watching him play. So I biasly, I want them to keep him.
I mean, his comp coming out of college was like an Al Horford type of big. And that's as we see in the playoffs with the Boston Celtics. Even Al Horford now, I mean, that dude walked through a time machine or something. Like compared to what I had to live with in Philadelphia, being a Philadelphia fan, and then having to watch that whole situation blow up in my face. Then he goes back to Boston, and now it's like he's the Al Horford of old. Like forget Atlanta Al Horford. He looks like University of Florida Al Horford. Like some of these nights, like it's absolutely ridiculous. What they've gotten.
He looks like an NCAA champion right now.
Yeah, but that type of big man, I think that's what the Orlando Magic would want Wendell Carter to be, and that's an incredibly valuable player. And I would agree with that line of thinking. Like, I would absolutely keep him as part of the long-term plans. I would see if he can continue to further develop more of that offensive skill set. Like, that's what really intrigued me when I evaluated Wendell Carter, why I had him fourth on my board that year in the draft, was because I went back and watched a lot of the high school stuff. And a lot of people could say the same things about like Bam Adebayo. Like Bam Adebayo, if you go back and watch his high school tape, like he's doing a lot more than he did at Kentucky. If you go back and watch Wendell Carter's high school tape, he was doing a lot more than he did at Duke. And I still think there's plenty more to unlock with him, which is why I think between the two bigs, I know Mo Bamba is a very unique big man when it comes to his size, his length, on top of the shooting ability that he provides, right? That's a very rare package, but it's a package that just hasn't come together yet. Yeah, exactly. Like the consistency just hasn't been there. The opportunity hasn't been there. I think at some point you kind of just got to cut your losses. And if he succeeds somewhere else, that's great. It's fantastic. We're always rooting for players to succeed.
Right. Wendell has more dog too. Like Wendell's going to go get it. And that's what I like that. And that could just be because the way when I played, obviously I didn't play it, there's a magnitude, but when I played, that's what my coach would always refer to as going to go get it, that dog. And we wouldn't call it 50-50 balls. We'd call it 80-20s. Like that's our ball. If there's a ball on the ground, that's ours. And like, you need that when you're trying to create a culture. Like you need those guys that are going to play like that. And he plays like that. He plays that dog. And to your point, if you had to choose between the two, I would definitely go with Wendell.
So we've walked through each of the position groups with the young guys, right? So we're kind of building towards this question that I have for you before we start throwing out specific needs and some specific names with the 2022 draft class. Interesting players at each different positional group on this roster. However, as you astutely pointed out, the long-term commitment really isn't there for a lot of them. Like a lot of these guys really haven't separated themselves as I'm going to be with the Orlando Magic for the next 5 to 6 years. And a situation that I've had some interesting debates about with this draft in particular, because the Oklahoma City Thunder are in a position they could potentially end up with the 4th pick. They could miss out on some of these forward/bigs who could really help them in the long term, but could be stuck with choosing like a guard, for example, like a Jaden Ivey, right? When they already have SGA and Giddey on the roster. You guys could, I hope not, but you guys could potentially be in like a similar position to where you really have to consider best player available and just take the best talent, who's the best player left on your board, versus fit. Which approach would you take if you're drafting for the Orlando Magic? Are there enough pieces on this roster to where you feel you could maybe try to fit some more of the puzzle pieces together? Or do you think, no, there's not enough keepers on this roster, we just got to go get the best player available in the draft?
Now this may not be the right answer, but I go all in on, I want to draft the best player.
It's my answer. Don't worry, it's my answer.
Yeah, I want to draft the best player. And then where the pieces fall after they fall, we'll make it work. That's my job as a GM to make it work for the best player. But when you have the opportunity to get the best player, I think you should always go for the best player.
Absolutely. I would agree 100%. So there are some interesting names near the top of the draft. The Orlando Magic are tied for the best odds to land the number one pick. By the time everyone's listening to this podcast, my audience will know where the Orlando Magic fall in the draft. We, however, recording this on Monday, May 16th, we do not know where the chips are going to fall on draft lottery night. So let me just ask you a question, Max, and feel free to throw in any specific names for prospects if you want to open up the conversation. But if you're just looking at everything we've talked about, we've gone through every single positional group on the roster. We know kind of who everybody is, and we have a sense of what they project to be long-term. What do you think is the top need, or maybe like one or two needs that you think the Magic definitely need to address with their lottery pick on draft night?
We need shooting. Now, obviously, the top picks in this draft, when you just look at like draft boards, a lot of power forwards. Like you look at Chet, you look at Jabari, Paolo. So those aren't necessarily the guard. Like we have enough guards, but shooting has been and scoring the basketball has been the biggest problem for the Orlando Magic, right? Sometimes the game's not as hard. You don't need to make it so difficult. Like you mentioned, we were actually had a legitimate defense.
Yeah,
we didn't have a legitimate offense, very inconsistent. We didn't have like a go-to guy.
I won't make you relive a lot of the season by reading off the synergy percentiles on offense as a team. But it wasn't good. We'll just say that.
It was not good. So obviously we need a scorer and someone who's can get a bucket themselves. Yeah. But quite frankly, when you're tied for the highest odds to draft the player, overall, so number one overall, you want to just draft the best available. That's what I would do. I would just keep it simple and give me the best talent that we can get. And now whether you think that's Chet, I think Chet's obviously the unicorn of this draft. I've been following him since high school. I think a lot of people have. He is just flat out ridiculous. I really like Jabari. I think I'm a little higher on Jabari than most, but I believe you just go with the best talented guy. Orlando Magic needs scorers. They need shooters. So later on in the draft, I think you definitely address that. But when it comes to your number one pick, if we get so lucky to get that, it's just drafting that best talented guy.
So I would hope that the Orlando Magic have a top three pick and they can go get one of those three guys that we just mentioned versus having to choose between like a Shane Sharp or a Jaden Ivey or whoever else we might throw in that conversation after those top three names. You outlined two very important offensive points that I agree with you would be absolute needs that you have to address, but you can address those needs in different ways depending on the player you could choose at the top. Chet and Jabari, for example, are both these big forward / potential centers in Chet's case who can stretch the floor. They can knock down the easy catch and shoot threes, the trailer threes. Those are things that they can do, but in different ways. If they get to live up to their potential, they might be doing a little more creating for themselves and for others off the bounce. But right now, that's not the type of player that they are. So they can provide shooting, but not do it yourself potential number one / number two option right now. At least not right now, my opinion. Right. Paolo's not the shooter that those two are, but he is the scorer.
He is the scorer.
That they aren't. So out of those three guys, just given what I laid out there for you in terms of what their evaluation looks like right now, who do you think the Magic should select out of those three guys? If they get the number one pick, they got their option out of all of them. Who do you think they should go with?
If they got the number one overall pick, I think they go with Chet.
Okay.
That's who I think they go with. And I think not like a peer pressure pick, but I think he's the unanimous or I would say he's the unanimous number one overall pick in this draft. The consensus. I think they go with Chet. Now, Shad, I know, is really high on Jabari. And whenever Shad's high on somebody, I always stop and think when he tells me something.
I agree. First of all, shout out Rashad, friend of the Draft TV podcast. Shout out to him. So my argument, when we've sat down at No Ceilings and we've done like collective like mock drafts, we come together and we want to debate in the war and want to do a mock draft. my argument for Orlando for a while has been, you're telling me the team based out of Orlando, Florida, doesn't have to go very far to see Jabari Smith. Jabari Smith has torn it up at Auburn all year long. You're telling me that their scouting department isn't coming back every single time after those trips to go see Jabari and be like, oh my God, this guy's so impressive. Like, why are we not going to take him if we have the number one pick? Like, I think that's actually an argument just based on proximity to where how far they have to travel to actually see these guys. Like, I think that's something that could possibly benefit them. I'm assuming you probably would feel the same way.
Yeah, that's a fantasy. See, you dive deep. See, that's called next level thinking. So you have the people that look at the mock drafts and the boards, but then you have the next level thinkers such as yourself that look into location, how often they're seeing them. That's a really great point. And like I said, Shad he has like a third eye when it comes to seeking talent. And so whenever he says something, I just believe it and I trust it because he's just, I don't know, like it's the weirdest thing. And shout out to Rashad. Like I met him, just quick story.
Yeah, I want to hear this story because you guys have been connected. I want to hear how you two got connected.
Yeah, that's like family to me. So I met him. I had him on my show one time. I had another podcast and I couldn't miss the interview. So, and I don't recommend people doing this, but I'm like, wow, I didn't realize I didn't, this before I wrote stuff down and I overbooked. And I was like, oh my God, I'm commentating for an MMA event in Orlando. I can't miss this opportunity though. So I'm driving to the event and I'm interviewing him on the phone for my podcast. I got it all plugged up on my mobile podcast device. So I'm interviewing him and it went fantastic. And, then I'm like, wait a second, you cover the Orlando Magic. You're in Orlando. And he's like, yeah. I was like, wow, I can cover the Orlando Magic. So that's how we connected. And I've always told him what I wanted to do. And he completely took me under his wing. Like, he was one of the most genuine people I ever met. Like, he had no reason to take me under his wing. Yep. I was like telling him, look, I want to be the next Colin Cowherd. I want to do this. I want to do that. And he's like, you're going to be even better. And he's like, here, I'll show you. I'm like, wow, okay, that sounds great. But he actually did everything that he said. So quick shout out to him. But I remember he would look at certain players. He'd be like, year 3, this guy's going to pop. I'm like, what? And he's like, year 4, this guy's going to pop. I'm like, well, how do you know what year they're going to pop? And then it's like, that's exactly what happens. And so it's really unreal how he's able to seek talent. He doesn't even just do it for basketball. He does it for people and life. And this is a good person. Like, I don't know how he knew to connect with me and to keep me under his wing. Like, it's just some weird stuff that I don't question anymore. So when he says Jabari, that's now my pick is Jabari. So I say Chet as in that's not a bad pick. Universally, I think that's a really good pick for the Magic if they have the opportunity.
I also think, though, that if they had number 1, they would probably go Chet. Yeah. That's also what I think.
But when I hear how high Jabari, like why Rashad says Jabari, what you just mentioned, Jabari is a really good pick for the Orlando Magic. Sorry to go on that little tangent about Rashad, but like it is unreal watching these games with him and how like we'll just watch players be like, year 6, Mo Bamba. I'm like, what? And I'm like, year 6. Like it's unreal.
No, Rashad's awesome. Like I said, friend of the Draft Deeper podcast. I have his book on pre-order as much as a lot of other people probably do. So it's going to be a fantastic read. And he did promise me another podcast to dissect the book when it drops. I will hold him to that. He will be back to talk about his book on my damn show. I will hold him to that. But I know he'll come back.
It's unreal. We were covering the NBA draft show. I'm sorry. I don't know if you're on a time constraint. And when we did the draft show last year in Atlanta on SUV TV, I was a shooter. Like, I can shoot the ball. Now, you can question my defense at times, my athleticism at times compared to you, but I know one thing, I can shoot the ball. Like, I feel very confidently. Like, I promise you I can outshoot Ben Simmons. Like, that's how I feel. Like, so but we were before the draft show, I was like, all right, Sean, let's see what this is about. I challenge you to a shootout. So we did a shootout before the draft show. After the war room, we're talking about all the prospects and Scotty Barnes and whatnot. This guy missed one shot the entire time. Like, we shot tons of free throws, tons of threes, and we had a bet on who can't miss a certain amount at this point. He only missed one shot. He shot probably at least 30 to 40 times. And I was just like, yeah, this is ridiculous. Like, he doesn't just talk it. Like, he actually genuinely is a NBA guru, like basketball guru. Like, that's how, from actually playing it to analyzing it to talking it. Yeah, he's the real deal.
It's the mark of a pro, man. It's a telltale sign. If you don't miss shots in an open and an empty gym, that's what you should be doing as a pro. When you are missing those shots, that can sometimes be a telltale sign. Like, hey, we got to work on some stuff here. But yeah, I can assure you, Jabari Smith ain't going to be missing many shots in his workouts, including for the Orlando Magic, which if they buy into his size, his shooting versatility, what he could grow into if he can develop some of the ball handling, if he can get better as a finisher off the bounce around the basket, which I think a lot of that stuff can be unlocked in certain ways. I don't know if he's ever going to be a number one option in the NBA. I think we're talking about number one options. I think Paolo obviously has the claim to that throne in this draft class, but I'm not saying it's a guarantee. Like, I'm not going to Vegas and putting my poker chip down on like that outcome to happen. You know what I mean? So but I will say, if the Magic do slip to number 3, right, and Chet and Jabari are off the board, and Paolo's the guy that you guys are able to take, and he becomes everything that we might think he can be on offense, is that a situation where you're trying to tell the fan base, like, all right, guys, like, I know that he might not be Chet, he might not be Jabari. We've heard all the great things that are said about him on the ESPN draft show or the Sports Talk 2319 draft show, whatever the case may be. But we still got a really, really good player in Paolo. Like, do you think that he can be one of the better fits out of this draft class, regardless, for the Orlando Magic?
Yeah, and this sounds so terrible to say because there's a lot of things to be positive about the Orlando Magic. But when you go to a team that doesn't have a go-to, it's pretty easy to sell somebody that has that type of talent in the top 3 pick. This could be the guy. Like, this could be our guy. So it's not like he's going, like, for example, Detroit, I think Cade's their guy. Like, that's your guy.
Without question.
You go to Houston, obviously you have a couple different pieces, but we talked about Jalen Green, showed a lot of flashes of that could be that guy. Orlando, who's the guy? Who's the guy? So it's pretty easy. It's an easier pitch to the fans to say this could be the guy because there's not someone he really has to. Again, it sounds bad to say, but there's not one individual you have to take the throne from, or you don't have to really sell this too hard to say this could be the guy when you don't really have a guy. So. Not that the young players can't develop to become that, but as of right now, we don't have it. So if Paolo falls to us, I don't think it's a hard sell at all.
I think he'd be a great option in Orlando, man. The more that I think about my personal preferences in terms of fits, I know a lot of people much smarter than I am have said the Paolo Orlando fit makes a ton of sense. For like months ago, people like Chuck from Chucking Darts, a whole bunch of other people were saying this. I've been able to sit down and think about the team fit more, especially once the season ended, now that we really knew, like, who are the teams that are probably going to be vying for these spots in the draft. The more and more I think about it, the more I think Paolo, like, really should be a part of the Orlando Magic organization. And if you guys do get that number 1 piece to work around a point guard like Markelle Fultz, to work around another defensive stopper in the backcourt like a Jalen Suggs, with a Franz Wagner able to play off of anybody else that you can throw into the lineup, and then with a big like Wendell Carter, you sprinkle in some more pieces of depth to that team. And now you're really making something that can be a legitimate playoff contender in the Eastern Conference if you continue to add the right bench pieces around those guys. So that's the fit for me. I would really love for that to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. We will have to see on June 23rd on draft night, but best wishes for the Orlando Magic, Max. I hope that they get a good pick in the draft by the time that everyone's listening to this podcast. I hope it's number 1 for Orlando's sake. We will have to wait and see, but this was an incredible episode of the podcast, Max. I really appreciate you coming on, not just talking about the Orlando Magic, but sharing some of your backstory too with Rashad. I love that stuff. I love hearing those stories. Good things tend to happen to good people. And I'm really glad that you've had a lot going right in your life, my friend. You absolutely deserve it. You work your ass off. I watch you from afar. You're doing a lot of great things in the multimedia space, and I cannot wait to see what more comes your way in the very near future, my friend. But again, thank you for coming on. Please share everything you're doing with my audience, because I know it's a lot. Share everything that you're doing. I want to make sure that they're tapped into everything that you're doing.
I really appreciate it. Like I said, it's great to talk to people that, like you said, are just good people that love basketball.
Yeah.
And you're definitely one of those people. I knew it when I talked to you on the draft show. You're always welcome. We'll set it up to come on my show whenever you have an opportunity.
Oh, yes, please.
I don't know. I don't mean for you to give up your studio location, but I'm assuming you're not in Orlando. But if you ever come to Orlando, we'll be able to do some in-person work. But you can find me. My name is my brand, Max Van Auken. It's a little bit of a unique last name. So that VAN space AUKEN on Instagram, Twitter. TheMVP.net is my website. And I have the Max Van Auken podcast. I just launched 2 new series, which is the Undrafted series. I really want to shed light on, I loved Rocky. Like, that's my all-time favorite movie. And so that's kind of inspired me to do this Undrafted series because there's a lot of great stories out there that aren't just in the bright lights, number one overall, but you have some real gems and people that have overcome stuff. So the Undrafted series there, I just had my first episode. Austin Pope is out. And then I just launched my NBA Experience series, which is all underneath my Max Van Auken podcast channel, wherever you listen to podcasts, where I just had Bob Rathbun, the voice and the announcer of the Atlanta Hawks. So you can check that out. And then you also, I can't believe I'm doing this, but it's time I adapt. I'm big on TikTok now. So not big as in the numbers, but big as in I'm trying to become big on TikTok. It's the way that people are consuming information these days. So you can check me out on TikTok as well with Max Van Auken. But other than that, that's really about it. So I appreciate it. And it's an absolute honor to talk hoops with you.
2 things. Number one, we've had the TikTok conversations behind the scenes at No Ceilings. We got to get a TikTok friend. So it's not going to be me. I am not great with a lot of that stuff. It won't be me, but we got to figure it out in some way.
Listen, I'm telling you, Mark Cuban said it. That's what 2 people told me. My guy from ESPN Lafayette told me this because he listens to Gary Vee. I really like Gary Vee. I don't know if you follow him. He's an awesome entrepreneur. But he talked about it. But when Mark Cuban told Colin Cowherd, he said, this is going to be the way people consume information because the younger generation is becoming more and more impatient.
Yep.
That microwave society. People don't want to watch and sit through a whole game, unfortunately, unless you're diehards like us. That's how people are going to consume it. So we have to, as content creators, as entertainers, have to be able to adapt to how people like to receive their information. So I started doing it, and the algorithms are absolutely ridiculous. You don't even have to follow me to see my stuff. So I highly recommend. You have amazing takes. You have a great basketball mind. If you just do quick, and I'm not acting like I know everything because I'm still learning, but if you post about 3 a day and you do about 20 to 30-second clips, it could be about your draft content, anything hoop knowledge. I think people listening to this show that are big on it would love it.
Corey Tulaba, the NBA draft dude, took some of his YouTube spots on the TikTok and he just posted these little clips on there for like a week. And he showed us the videos and the attention that they got. We're like, okay, this is real. This is serious. We have to get it here somehow.
It's insane. Like I literally just started and I posted one video about why I said Kendrick Lamar is the Kawhi Leonard of the rap game. Just a quick rap analogy that I have. And it got 10.4K views, which isn't a lot compared to a lot of people. But I was like, I have like 30-something followers just started and hit 10.4. I was like, what have I been doing? Like, how many people could actually see my stuff? And so I just, now all of a sudden I'm all about it. So
have you listened to the album yet?
Dude, don't even get me started. I'm not the biggest Kendrick guy. I'm not trying to sound like a hater. I haven't finished listening to it. What I've heard, it's decent, but I'm probably going to turn a lot of your fans off that are listening to this. I just think he's one of the most overrated people because you put him in this GOAT, not you, but people put him in this GOAT conversation. It drives me insane.
I wouldn't. I'm a huge hip hop rap guy. I agree with you. I wouldn't put him in that conversation.
Okay,
I think he's supremely talented. I love a lot of what he's done. To Pimp a Butterfly, I think is his best album. A lot of people would disagree.
Really?
I've heard a lot of that. I think that's his best album. Not to like all of a sudden turn my podcast into a hip hop podcast, but I think that's his deepest, his most complete album. In my opinion, I love it.
Hey, all right. Well, listen, we're gonna have you on my show. We may not even talk NBA. We'll talk Marvel movies and hip hop.
Dude, 100%. I'm down. I say all that to say that I have not listened to the new album yet. I was looking for like an honest review. I've told myself I'm going to sit down and I'm going to listen to it when I have the time to just go start to finish. And I don't have to be interrupted by anything. I can just completely absorb all of it. I have not found that time between when it came out on Friday up until today. So I'm still looking for that time. But I cannot wait. I cannot wait to sit down and listen to it.
Isn't it crazy? I don't mean to keep going off on a tangent, but how valuable time is. Like now, when I worked out is usually when I listen to music, but now I just listen to podcasts. Like that's all I listen to. So the only time I listen to music is on my way somewhere. But even then, I usually put on a podcast. So it's pretty hard to actually listen to stuff nowadays. But My man, I really appreciate it. I'm sorry to take up even more of your time. It's been an absolute honor.
No, absolutely, Max. Come on, take up more of my time. You can. I've done 2-hour podcasts by myself, bud. Just talking, rambling about the NBA draft. So yeah, anybody who's a dedicated listener to the Draft Team podcast knows that I've said far too many words by myself on an audio feed. So try, and the podcast I do with Chuck. Shout out to Chuck from Trucking Darts. We go for like 2 hours. Yeah, and come on, taking up more of my time. Good. Come on, man. I got plenty of time for you, boss. I forgot what we went off on the hip hop tangent and talked about. I was gonna say something to follow up TikTok. I don't even remember what I was gonna say, but either way, listen.
Next time
you're
we
awesome.
talk on my show, I hope you got on TikTok by that time. No pressure.
I would hope so too. We gotta get No Ceilings on TikTok. Yeah, whenever you want me on your show, man, we'll talk about whatever. However much time you want to have me on for, we'll talk about whatever, and then I will share the absolute hell out of that episode for my audience, where if they want to know more about me, right, like not just the NBA draft junkie me, if they want to know more about me, go listen to the Max Van Auken podcast episode where we just shoot the shit for 2 hours and do whatever we want to do.
We'll set it up, because what my show has become, I'm not saying I'm like the next Joe Rogan by any means, but it's become such a free-flowing conversation where I have like certain episodes where I'm trying to talk NBA playoffs, but me and Combo end up talking about, like, I was going to the movies last week.
Shout out to Andrew. Shout out to Combo's Core too.
Yeah, we end up talking. Like, I give him a hard time about something in New York, and before you know it, we're talking 30 minutes about how he can't do X amount of pull-ups in New York or something. So it's like my conversation has just become such a free-flowing thing. So I would love to have you on.
And thank you one more time to everybody who took the time to listen to this episode of the Draft Deeper podcast. I appreciate each and every one of you listening out there. Keep the momentum going all the way up to the draft. Plenty more content coming, but to make sure you're subscribed and locked into that content, make sure you're obviously subscribed to this podcast, wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. Make sure you're following No Ceilings on Twitter at No Ceilings NBA. Subscribe to the Substack, NoCeilingsNBA.com. As Corey Tulloch likes to say, it's free 99, baby. Doesn't cost you a dime. You get every single piece of draft content you could possibly want under one roof. We're just going to keep pumping out content. I cannot wait for what we have planned over the next 2 months. Definitely going to be incredible special content that you can get access to if you're subscribed. And definitely make sure you're subscribed over on that front. Until we meet again after the lottery, after I've been able to share my reactions to the lottery along with Stephen Gillespie. That show will be Stephen Gillespie's last show for this draft cycle over on Draft Deeper, until we can give those reactions and continue to cover the draft all the way up through June 23rd. Thank you again for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.